Hello, I'm Valerie Steffen, part of Bright's training team, and I want to welcome you to today's presentation. I'm excited to share with you today the Bright MLS T3 Home Demand Index. And to right off the bat answer one of the most common questions we've been receiving, the index is included in its entirety as part of your base subscription to Bright. So what we're going to be talking about today is really accessing the home demand index itself and lots of detail about how the index is created so you'll be able to use it confidently, some of those various uses, and I'm going to do my best to interweave answers to some of the general questions we've received about the home demand index as we go through. We're fortunate enough to have one of our partners from T360 with us today who'll help answer some of your detailed questions towards the end of the presentation. So what is the Home Demand Index, or HDI? Well, the Home Demand Index tracks the level of interest through pre-purchase activity to measure home buying demand in a specific market, which we've defined as 3 MLS markets, also at a zip code level or at a home type level. So let's break that down a little bit more. Based again on some questions we've been receiving, I want to make sure everyone understands what an index is exactly. An index is a method to track the performance of a group of assets in a standardized way. These could be a broad-based index that captures an entire market. So if you think of things like maybe you've heard of Standard & Poor's 500 index or the Dow Jones Industrial Average, or more specialized, such as indexes that track a particular industry or segment, which is what we have here in the Bright MLS T3 Home Demand Index. The HDI uses factors like agents viewing reports on behalf of buyers, buyer reviews of listings sent by their agent, showings, and a whole lot of data is crunched. For example, over 135,000 pieces of showing data were used in the past month to determine a score for buyer demand in a market segment. So that score is compared against our baseline, which we're using the 2019 market as the base. So sort of the mid part of that range or score, sort of normal would be 100. That equals a steady market or steady demand. Scores that fall below that 100 level would indicate less demand, and scores above indicate more demand. So in terms of what this home demand index means to you, well, whether you're looking to grow your market expertise, share the home demand index to demonstrate insight into housing demand to your prospects or social media efforts, to present sellers with compelling arguments for pricing it right, or guide buyers in the right direction for a sound investment and a solid offering strategy, the Home Demand Index is giving you really valuable insight. The question is really, how will you use it to drive your business forward? So we're going to dig deeper into where you may use various aspects of the report and suggested use cases as we cover it. So enough overview, let's jump into Bright. So the report is housed under the Market menu, under the Market Resources section, and you'll see the title Home Demand Index. And to pause here for a second to address a couple of related questions that we're receiving a lot, and they are, how do I learn more, or how do I explain this to my clients easily? Well, obviously you're in the right place to learn more and get the information you need for your narrative or talk track. But we've also provided documentation on the material right in the system. We have our integrated guide right in the menu. Just click on the I for additional information and accessing an integrated video. If you click the button that says Learn More, you'll get an article and overview with valuable information as well. This includes handouts that you may want to utilize with your clients. So clicking on the Home Demand Index link, I am taken to www.homedemandindex.com. And this is a link you can certainly share with your clients if you want them to have access to the report and all of its information. The site itself additionally has helpful information built into it to assist with your narrative with your clients. So if we click on the About link, you'll get some really helpful background information to give you context about the report. As an overview, it's just letting you know that this is an index that measures and tracks consumer and real estate professional behavior related to shopping for real estate. If you scroll down a little bit more, you'll learn more about what the differentiators are for this index, what makes it different from other stats that you might see. And I know, speaking to real estate professionals, you have a lot of stats coming at you from Bright and elsewhere. And the home demand index isn't really designed to replace those other reports. Rather, it's a complement. So the graph you see gives a really clear illustration to the differentiators between this and other reports. So traditional indexes have a focus on sort of what's happened in the past in terms of pended and sold data. And that can often be information reported months and sometimes even a quarter in the past. The Bright MLS T3 Home Demand Index has past data, but the focus is on, again, that pre-purchase activity, those activities that are leading to sales. So the index allows real estate professionals and their clients to sort of put their ear to the ground of the housing market in an entirely new way. And in looking at that demand, we're able to determine what's happening in near real time and potentially what's likely to be happening in the near future. I heard a really great analogy about this from Jack Miller, the president of T360, and he sort of explained it from the standpoint of a retail shopping model. So say you work at a mall and you run register receipts, right? And you probably run monthly or quarterly reports. And those are valuable in the sense that they're letting you know what sales were. And that's what a typical index or stats report focuses on. But if you're interested in things like who was shopping and how many people were shopping and what stores they were visiting, and if it's a clothing store, what clothes were they trying on, or if it was, a car dealership, what cars were they taking for a test drive? That's where you would be looking at the home demand index for that type of insight, those leading activities that are hopefully going to result in the sale. So let's scroll down a little further and take a look at the markets covered. This is an area, again, where we had a lot of questions. Is Loudoun County offered? How useful is this in my market in Harrisburg? How did you guys come up with the areas that are covered, the markets that are included? Well, these primary markets were determined in combination with subscriber focus groups and then were supported by the data that was used. They're not necessarily the groups that, say, the U.S. Census uses, but they were the natural markets at the MLS market level. And as far as extending the markets and the coverage, that's something that you can look to see later on this year. We're expecting about the third quarter to have more of the Bright footprints included in for home demand index. So finally, at the bottom of the page, you have a little overview of Bright and T360 as organizations, and these are useful, again, to give background to a consumer that you might be sharing this with. I also want to point out the FAQ section. So at the top of the page, we have a lot of details here for you. And again, if you happen to be getting questions or want to give a more detailed explanation to a current or prospective client you choose to share this information with, these will be helpful. So we have specific counties and cities that are covered in the market. And again, right now the initial markets covered are the Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. area, though again, that'll expand later on this year, around the third quarter. And then we have the question, what are the market activity ratings? So when we talked about at the beginning what an index is, it's that span of information. And then within the index, we have breakouts or ratings. So when we get a score, we see where does it fall in the span of the market activity ratings. So these five. So again, as I mentioned, steady is 100. And then if the score is above, it may be moderate or high. And that's reflective of how much buyer level demand there is. Or if it's below 100, it'll fall into slow or limited in terms of demand. In terms of context, pointing out the navigation in the top right section of the screen, we have the three markets covered. So if you click on any one of these, you'll see at the top the most current month. And we're looking at the March report, which covers February's data. A new report will be added around about the 15th of each month. If you scroll down, you can access overview reports back to October of 2020 for each one of the market segments. So looking at this, the first thing to take in is where the market activity rating is. And home demand index is moderate for DC overall. And I want to pause here for a second because of feedback and questions we're getting. We've had the question that sometimes the overall home demand index or the market rating, activity rating, may not feel like an exact match for your individual experience with buyers and sellers. Remember that this is covering the broad geography of the whole market with this. Drill down, or when you drill down further, maybe at a home type or certainly at a zip code level, you'll see that there definitely can be differentiation and may be a better match and speak to the narrative or positioning you're working with the client. So remember, the data here is at a macro level. So back to this example, for DC, we're seeing that the market activity rating, home demand index, is 117, putting it at the second highest level. We can see right beside it that the demand has risen from the previous month, which was 101, and that's a rise of 15.8%. And it's where we'd seasonally expect to be based around last year's index of 116. So that's less than a full percentage point above where we'd expect it to be. So it'd be safe to say if you're working with a seller that it's a market in their favor. You know, we have demand that's here and here are the stats to back it up. Similarly, if you're representing buyers in this market, you'd want to make sure they're armed with this information as they work on their offers. A great way to digest this information and put it in context is to use the summary that's provided in the overview. This interpretation of market conditions is provided by Dr. Paul Bishop, an economist who formerly worked with NAR. So this area is sort of the initial taste for the information, and we'll want to dig deeper, and we can do that by clicking on View Details in the top right-hand corner. From here, we can use the individual links provided to jump to specific sections of the report. Or we can scroll through, which is what I'm going to do. So the overall report is repeated from our previous page at the top of this section, and we're just going to scroll down to get to the historical year-over-year comparison. Now this is where we get a chance to see a fuller scope of seasonality and a deeper view of past behavior. This chart is going to display a rolling 12 months, and our orange line is showing the most recent 12, and the blue line is the year previous. In looking at this, your eye probably shoots immediately to the March-April dip, where COVID threw the market for a loop. In May, we see pent-up demand pitching the line back up and keeping demand over 2019 for the rest of the year. In October through December, we see a drop-off as we'd expect, where things slow down through the colder months and holidays. And in January to February, we're pretty much where we'd anticipate the market being, starting to pick up for spring. You can hover on any of the points to see specifics. And again, we have a nice summation of conditions, how, low mortgage rates, an improving economy, and the desire by some buyers to purchase a larger home contributed to recent demand. So very digestible. Drilling still down further, we can scroll down to the home demand index map. The home demand indexes are coded here at the zip code level. And note at the bottom of the page here, or the bottom of the graphic, we have a legend. If you hover on the map itself, you can get a more detailed explanation through a pop-up. And really, this map is such a clear illustration of how localized real estate can be. If you are in a city, it may be, a block-to-block difference in terms of demand. And we can see that here, looking at the zip code level, we have in some spots the highest in dark orange right next to a limited zip code, which would be in dark blue. The table beside the map is sorted highest to limited in terms of zip codes. And when I saw that, my mind immediately went to the use of that information in prospecting efforts. If you're wanting to reach out to prospect to maybe high demand areas, maybe reach out to potential sellers in an effort to create inventory, you could grab the zips or grab the related cities and pop those into Bright's public records or into Remine to create labels. You could even do a screen grab of the map itself as part of your talking points. And I again mentioned to you, you're welcome to share the link. You're welcome to do screen grabs to share different parts of the report. Just make sure they're properly attributed, of course. This information is going to help you better understand your market. And again, share it on your social media, on your blog, if you want it as sort of fodder to, demonstrate your knowledge of the market. So whether you're working with buyers or sellers, again, this localized understanding is going to help with their market positioning. Coming into a high index area as a buyer, I need to have the expectation that I'll likely be in a multi-offer situation, and that should inform the offering strategy that I take on. And as a seller, on the other side of that, if I'm in a high index area, I need to prepare myself for, a potential onslaught of showings. This is a great place where you might want to share this illustration if you're working with a seller who is also planning on buying in terms of strategy. Think about if they're changing geographies, where does their current home fall in terms of market activity rating versus the area they'd like to move into. If they're in a slow or limited zip where they're selling and planning on moving to, say, a higher demand area, where they might have a tougher time getting an offer accepted, maybe they want to secure the new property first, or if the situation's flipped, vice versa. Note that for places on the map where the zip codes are very small or it's maybe a little difficult to see, you can use the search zip code box at the bottom to narrow to just a view of a particular zip code. Moving on, note that you drill down even further to demand and inventory by home type. Again, we have an economist overview letting us know all home types had a rise in interest in February, but the highest interest in this marketplace was the higher end of the price spectrum for single family and condos. As is likely not a surprise to everyone working in DC, buyers found their home search challenging based around the amount of available inventory and demand. You can scroll through all of the home types or zip over to a specific option you're interested in by clicking the link. I want to note that if you look between the MLS market areas, Baltimore, Philadelphia, DC, you will notice that the price segmentation is different for each market. We do keep 6 market segments for each one of the areas, but because each market is different, the price breakdown will be different. So let's scroll through, and just at a glance, you can see the confirmation of the economist overview that we saw. As our price goes higher, so does demand increase. So for instance, in single family homes above 950,000, our market activity rating was high at 146, up from 121 the previous month. and 138 the prior year. Our months of inventory is 2, which is, high for the market segments that we're looking at here. Average daily inventory last month was 534, and inventory sold last month was 270. So inventory levels relative to other segments, not terrible. Lots of showings and views, but a decent amount of inventory. So if I was explaining this as part of, say, a CMA or listing presentation, I'd point to the index growth, or, shopping demand, if you want to use more layman's terms, from last month to this month, and certainly comment on the seasonality. So we're higher than we'd be typically, as shown by the number from the prior year. So let them know that there is competition in their market segment, which is what we see by average daily inventory, months of inventory, and solds for the last month. I think it's so crucial in establishing credibility to show the numbers. Here you're able to show them numbers that they cannot get elsewhere, and let the market speak to their strategy. So if you make this part of the relationship and the benefits that you share with a client, something you share regularly, it's going to make the argument for you if you end up in a situation where you need to do something like a price change. Or on the buyer side, if we're talking strong buyer offers, if we scroll down to townhouse, row house, twin, it's a mouthful, we've got a report demonstrating a market where shopping activity is moderate, second only to highest. But we've got nearly all the daily inventory sold. So for me, that's a little gulp. If you're working with a buyer, what can we anticipate based on that information for buying a townhouse in March? How can we use that information to help inform a buyer who maybe has, a timeline for their move when they're considering their offer? Or if we look at condo less than 570, definitely a lot of interest, rising demand, above seasonal expectations, but we're looking a little healthier in terms of available inventory. So, perhaps less pressure for offers there. So this is really all about better intelligence through this sort of window pane we can look into shopping experiences. These reports are so great for helping set expectations for our current situation and to some degree helping to get a feel for what likely may be developing. Now, I will also make a pitch for using the market performance reports for drilling down even further, at say a subdivision neighborhood or a radius or even a number of beds or baths level. I won't get too far into this because this could be a whole other webinar. But the market performance reports, if you haven't used them before, they've been around for quite some time. We do have documentation at support.brightmls.com for step-by-step instructions. We have videos on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/brightmls, that talk about using the market performance report to that end. Those are also using anticipatory pre-purchase behaviors. So really good stuff. They are available for the entirety of the Bright footprint. So for those of you, again, who are asking questions in terms of, I'm in Harrisburg or I'm in Loudoun County or wherever that is not encompassed in the home demand index right now, this is a great solution for you as well. Okay, so our time is getting short at this point, so we are going to jump over and take some of our more technical questions, and we're going to ask Jack Miller, the president of T360, our partner in this report, to answer those for us. Our first question has to do with a perceived overlap with our existing reports, things like smart charts. Is there an overlap there?
We have had some vendors say to us like, hey, are you guys building a replacement for some reporting tool that is out in the industry? And I think the biggest difference with the home demand index is that we're really comparing it to national housing indexes. We have an economist that's looking at this data with us. So it's more of an evaluative, analytical type of tool as opposed to a reporting tool. So, and I think most of us are used to using reporting tools. We're used to pulling our favorite reports from whatever tool we use, whether it's Smart Chart or an MLS report or things like that. And those are great, and keep using those. If they provide you value, that's amazing. What this is for getting a perspective on what's happening in the market, what the activity and demand level is, and having, again, that expert economics copy that we have written every month about these different parts of the market and what's going on with those parts of the market. So that's really, for me, the key differentiator. And we see this as not a reporting product, but as it's an index, and with economics thinking and analysis.
Great. Next, we have a question. How is 100 the base of the index? Does a score of 100 mean a normal market? And does that correlate with a buyer's market or a seller's market or months of supply of demand?
That's a great question. So the 100 this is what's different about a housing index. Housing indexes in general, tend to baseline off of a point in time. They'll pick a point in time and say, we're going to start that point in time as our baseline, and then we're going to measure against that baseline over time. So we baselined on 2019 activity data. So a 100 represents the baseline from the 2019 activity data. It's probably really good we didn't baseline off of 2020 because it was such a wild year, but 2019 was our baseline activity. So we expect, you'll see this in all indexes, is that there's going to be, if there's more and more activity, you'll see some natural drift up. So 100 was what was normal for the market in 2019. But, as communities grow, as there's more housing, as there's more stuff going on, you may see that, 110 might become kind of the norm for the level of shopping activity. So that's how that baseline works. That's why the 100. And again, this is coming from the world of indexes and economics, where they want to pick a point in time and compare everything back to that and say, how are we doing versus that original measurement, so that we have a consistent view of what's going on.
Okay. Can you clarify the relationship between the home demand index and months of supply in inventory? So somewhat related to our previous question. I think this is coming from, these aren't always what we expect. Like, you'd expect a seller's market to show a high demand and vice versa for a buyer's market. We don't always see that here.
Is if you have limited inventory, then that can depress the amount of shopping that's going on, the amount of people that are actually out there looking at homes or doing showings. It doesn't mean that you're not in a seller's market, right? Because if there's limited inventory and there's more buyers than there are sellers, then you are in a seller's market, and you should advise your clients. But it's a different situation than if you have limited inventory and a ton of demand, where there's a lot of people looking and showing. That's where you're going to get in those multiple offer situations consistently. That's where you're going to be like, it's going to be a real pandemonium, right? So that's the difference, because there's just in some markets, there's just less inventory for people to look at. So there's not as many showings happening. There's not as many views happening. But even in that situation, if you were consulting with the seller, you say, look, we're still in a seller's market. There's still people shopping and buying. You can look at the inventory numbers and say, here's what's selling every month. I still think we can price aggressively, but that's different than limited inventory and a lot of people shopping. Limited inventory and a lot of people shopping, that's just different. So that's why it's not that, and it doesn't correlate. I think this is probably the biggest thing we have to teach, is that it doesn't correlate directly with the buyer's market, seller's market. It's a whole other view into what's going on in the marketplace.
And finally, are the 6 home type categories given index values available at the zip code level?
Part of what now that we've got the zip code map, which was a big push to get through to the zip code level, our team working with Bright MLS is looking at the data at the zip code level to see what level of indexing we can do on top of that. Because keep in mind, every time we do this, we take all the market activity, all the views, all the showings, everything going up. And so the first thing we're doing is we're slicing it all into zip codes. We're taking this big amount of information, we're slicing it into zip codes. And every time you slice up the data, there's a little less data to work with. And so we're now looking at probably the most popular zip codes, the ones that have a lot of listings, a lot of inventory, a lot of showings, a lot of activity, and saying, can we slice those further and dive into a zip code and say, within this zip code, can we reliably produce an index for, a single family home at a certain price point? And we haven't made that determination yet. And that's probably going to be at a zip code by zip code basis. And it will likely be the ones that have a lot of inventory, have a lot of activity, and where we're confident we can give you a view into the demand with the amount of data that we're getting. But it's a great question, and it's on point as far as the limits of what we can do with the data that we have about what the consumers are doing.
Thanks so much for that, Jack. Now, we're about at the end of our time together, so I just want to reiterate that you'll find a recording of this presentation at youtube.com/Bright MLS after this session. Again, there's support and articles, videos, and handouts available integrated right into your menu and right into homedemandindex.com. Step-by-step instructions at support.brightmls.com. And our customer success coaches are happy to bring a more localized view of this to your offices. Just reach out to them. Thank you so much for your time and attention today. Have a bright day.